A lot of the hosts are not necessarily professional hosts. Right? Many of them misprice their properties. A lot of people assume dynamic pricing is about increasing your rates. While there are a lot of business things to iron out and you might be very good at it, right? And if you're selling it too cheap, almost relative to market, I might be like, this is a scam possibly. Dynamic pricing is about fundamentally looking at supply and demand for any given day.
We have a very special guest on this episode, co-founder and CEO of one of the biggest analytics and dynamic pricing companies in the short-term rental industry. If you've been in the short-term rental industry, you've heard of PriceLabs, but you might not have heard of one of the men behind the magic, Richie Khandelwal. Hi, Richie. How are you doing today?
Hey, Santiago. Doing well and really excited to be here.
Me too. I was excited doing research behind the scenes before this a little bit. And we'll get right into your story. But yeah, one of the first things I noticed is that you started off in Chicago. I'm heading to Chicago in a couple days, and it's one of my favorite places to visit. I go yearly. So why don't we start there? Why don't we start a little bit about what is PriceLabs and how it got started?
Yeah. What is PriceLabs? We are a dynamic pricing and market data company for short-term rentals, right? We also do a few other verticals. If you're a part hotel or a campground or a hotel, we do work there as well. But primarily, we're very, very well known for our short-term rental industry, right? So dynamic pricing, very simply, we're going to touch into it a little bit later as well, but we adjust prices, right? And market data, if you're trying to understand what's happening in various markets around the world on Airbnb or VRBO, we have that data that you can get from us, right? How did we get started on this? I was hosting my house on Airbnb, right? Now, this is back in 2012, 2013 kind of time period, right? And Airbnb had started off, and the sharing economy, there was this whole boom on sharing economy. And I had a spare bedroom, which I started to put on Airbnb for short-term rentals to experiment extra income. I was a student back then. And so extra income always helps, right? And so that's kind of how we got started. And very quickly realized I was, like you said, in Chicago, winter months, almost no one's going to Chicago in winter unless there's something big going on. And then summers are certainly crazy. And then you have your games. Whenever there are games that are happening, then you have people come in, or some concert happening, people come in, and etc. Right? And so as a result of that, what I naturally understood was that there should be some kind of ebb and flow in supply and demand, and thus I must adjust my rates, right, based on if there is high demand for a day, I should be increasing my prices. Low demand for a day, I should be decreasing my prices. At the same time, a friend of mine, Anurag, who's also a co-founder at PriceLabs, we have three co-founders, Anurag, Sana, and I. And Anurag was doing revenue management for United Airlines, and he was based out of Chicago. And he had recently completed his PhD in operations research and had been at United, I want to say 1 or 2 years already, right? And so we'd meet often for drinks or something like later in the day. And I met him one day and I was like, hey, look, this is what I'm trying to do, and I need to adjust my prices. I need to do something so that I can, make more money out of my day, because otherwise there are days when my house is not rented, and then some days when it's just rented like this, and I'm clearly losing money on that day, right? Also, right? And so we sat down and we said, okay, let's do some research, and we posted on various forums around, hey, how are people doing this, etc. And the answer we heard typically was that no one was really doing anything for short-term rentals back then. Mm-hmm. And so we said, okay, if no one's doing it, maybe we'll build something and put it out. So that's what we did. We built something for my house, and then we built something for Chicago, and which now this is 10 years ago. So back in August of 2014, we built something for Chicago. And then December of 2014 or Jan of 2015, something like that, we put out a model for all of the world. And then ever since, we've been improving that dynamic pricing model. So yeah, so 10 years hence, but started with just trying to optimize my house.
Wow. What an incredible story, especially I think starting out with co-founders with such a competitive advantage of working in the airline industry for revenue management.
Yeah.
Really,
I mean, it was great competitive advantage. There are a lot of differences between how you do things in airline industry versus here, right? But at a high level, there are also a lot of similarities, right? So it was fantastic. And then another one of my co-founders, Sana, he came from. I actually don't know if they're still around because I don't use them anymore. But Orbitz used to be a big thing back in the day. It was a online travel agency, right? It was one of the brands between either Booking.com or Expedia. One of those brands is relatively smaller company. But Orbitz was a Chicago startup. They had built a fantastic travel search engine, and so Sana came from there. He had an intuitive understanding of how OTAs work, right? And so between the three of us, I had an understanding of how Airbnbs work. Anurag had an understanding of how pricing engines work, and Sana had an understanding of how OTAs work. And so the three of us came together to build it together, and that was amazing.
Wow, what a super team. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah.
And since then, I'm curious, what were some of the challenges from, back in the day, 10 years ago, starting off in Chicago, all the way to now? What are some of the biggest challenges you've faced?
Oh man, there are so many. Depends on every year has brought on its own different kind of challenge, right? Of course, the first year was all about how do you even get customers, right? And so like sending emails to all kinds of folks that we knew, quite literally then sitting down with every single person that we knew, and we said, hey, use this is how you use it, etc., right? In initial days, we had quite a bit of issues that like software issues. So dealing with that was always a challenge. COVID 2020 was a little bit of a nightmare, right? Because it was like an existential challenge of like, hey, will this business survive or not, right? Yeah. So that happened. Then, I mean, now it's about also like we have quite a substantial customer base, right? We're continuing to add users every day, right? But they all come with different understanding of PriceLabs and dynamic pricing, right? Our initial users were like the early adopters were really good at understanding how to use PriceLabs or understood the basics of economics or something like that, right? But as we go later, we have all kinds of customers. So we are now focused on how do we improve on our education? How do we improve our product to make it easier to use, right? So those are some of the challenges that we are working on in the product now.
That makes sense. Maybe take me back to COVID times where you said it's big existential crisis. What was that like? What were you feeling in the moment, and how did you overcome that with your team?
What we were feeling, it was like, so we had just decided, so this is back in Feb of 2020, right? We were a small team. We were a team of 9 people. And for perspective, today we are about 220 people or so, right? So back then we were a team of 9 people, and we had just rolled out offers to like 3 or 4 more people in Feb of 2020, I want to say, right? And so of course our salary costs had gone up, etc., right? And we were expecting to make certain amount of money, etc. And then suddenly COVID hits, March of something, right? It varied where you were in the world, right? But that happened, and suddenly every day we'd get emails from customers about, hey, I'm stopping the service, or can you cancel my last invoice, or XYZ, whatever would be the reason, right? And suddenly we were like, oh man, we just hired so many more people, and we have all of this payroll to run. But suddenly, like, I know like all of these customers are stopping, right? Thankfully, we had good cash in bank then, so we were okay with the survival, right? But just like no one knew buying is a challenge at some point, right? And so that happened. But anyways, we got out of it. We offered a bunch of discounts, etc. at the time, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, like the initial few weeks of it were just like nerve-wracking, like because you're like, I don't know how much discount can I offer. If I offer this, like what would happen to my cash flow? Will I be able to keep some of the team? Will I not be able to keep some of the team? What would happen? Like, but it was all okay. The good thing was our business is diversified between geographies, and every geography had a different date when they went in and out of COVID, thankfully. And so that was helpful for us. But yeah, I mean, initial days were scary.
You guys were the king of automation. If anyone's figured out how to make things automatic, it's you and your team.
We're trying. Still early.
Yeah, and in terms of COVID too, yeah, I can imagine the amount, obviously personal stress on your own life, and then on top of that, just trying to grow your company.
Exactly.
But just the realization, you said at that time you were around like 9-10 people, and now you're over 220.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So you've grown like 20 times or 20x in the past 4 years.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Well, congratulations. And I think it shows if you like get over those big challenges, then you have so much opportunity on the other side.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes in a business, it's all about persistence, right? When going gets tough, if you stick around for a few more months, weeks, months, years, whatever it is, right? There's possibly reward to be had on the other hand.
100%. Well, that's great. I love hearing about the journey. I'm hoping we can shift the conversation maybe towards some aspects that can help hosts directly.
Yeah.
So one of the main questions is, let's say you're a beginner host. What are the biggest mistakes beginner hosts are making in terms of pricing their Airbnb?
Beginner hosts, I think the biggest mistake that beginner hosts sometimes make is that they think very early in their journey that they can extract the same amount of rent or value as an experienced host is, right? And while there are a lot of business things to iron out, and you might be very good at it, right? But having so that you still need to generate enough reviews for your property, right? And if you don't have enough reviews for your property, it can initially you may need to start out with some bit of a discount to set up that credibility, get those reviews in, right? And then once you have those reviews, then you start pricing, right? The second mistake that people make often, especially the new hosts, the beginner hosts, right? They try to benchmark their price against someone else, right? And while in very sophisticated industries like, say, airlines, right? Or even in like a 5-star hotel, it may work well, right? But in short-term rentals, it doesn't quite work. One of the examples that I gave you is reviews, right? If you have a disparity in review, then you might not be able to extract the same amount of rental rate, right? But you may also have quite different property, right? You may also have not as polished photos, etc., right? But very importantly, you may be comparing against a host that themselves are not very professional, right? Or are super professional, right? So when you're say a revenue manager in a 5-star hotel and you're comparing against other 5-star hotels, what you know is everyone else is a professional and you're on a well playing field, right? But when you're in Airbnb ecosystem, right, a lot of the hosts are not necessarily professional hosts, right? And so many of them misprice their properties, right? Either pricing too low or pricing too high, whichever side they're on, right? And so we see some of the hosts come back and say, oh, but this person is charging so much more. But they're not generating the revenue that they're generating, right? If they're charging more, but if they're getting zero occupancy, what's the point? Or very little occupancy, right? Versus the reverse. So those are the two things that I see very often. One, comparing themselves to experienced hosts, even though you don't have the revenue, the reviews, etc. And number two, trying to compare against the market just on price, right? Rather than what PriceLabs does, which is algorithmically come up with a price, right? You can't just compare unless you really find pro users, the 5-star hotel revenue managers, where you can say, oh, if they're charging this much and I have a like-to-like property, I can charge the same, right? So that's what I would say. Two things that I see hosts make a mistake on.
I love those insights. I did not expect that too, especially considering comparing someone else, like, oh, look at what they're charging and blah, blah, blah. But you don't know if they're doing well or not. So
yeah, exactly.
And I think that definitely comes into play. Would you recommend PriceLabs to beginner hosts?
Yes, definitely, right? I will recommend PriceLabs to beginner hosts, but I would also say you should use some of the tools that Airbnb has to get the early bookings in, right? Because those help you build credibility on the platform, right? PriceLabs can help you if you are getting demand, and we can help you capture the demand, right, with the right price points, right? But if your property is not getting any demand because guests are not looking at it, hey, look, zero reviews, I don't know if this is even a good property, then PriceLabs is not going to help you, right? There's a price point, there's a set number of reviews where trust gets established, and then you can play with pricing. But if you have zero trust, you can be very cheap on price or very expensive on price. Nothing, it won't help. And here's a fine tip though, also Santiago, which is oftentimes new users think if I put my property very cheap, right, then I will get these reviews and whatever, right? But what really happens is, unlike hotels, where if I know I'm like, this is a 4-star hotel, this is a brand I know, and if it's cheap, I'm going to grab it. I'm going to be like, oh yes, like if Ritz-Carlton is available for like 50% discount, I'm going to pick it up, right? But in Airbnb, there is no perceived like I don't know what the quality of that property is or that host is, right? And so if you have zero reviews and if you're selling it too cheap, almost relative to market, I might be like, this is a scam possibly. I don't know if I want to bite into this, right? So there's this very weird thing that happens on Airbnb. If you price too cheap, you may not even get a booking on that platform, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those weird things on Airbnb. So yes, as a new host, you should try. You can definitely use PriceLabs, leverage some of the tools that Airbnb also provides you, right? So that you are in the right zone when you're playing there.
That makes sense. Almost like wine, where it's like the price signals the value. It's like,
Exactly.
this wine's $2. It can't be good.
Exactly. Even though, like now, it's been 10 years since I've lived in US, but back then, Trader Joe's wine for $2 was like amazing, though.
What? You got Trader Joe's wines for $2?
Yeah, it was something like that. I won't say $2, $3, $1.99, something like that. It was cheap. Yeah.
That might be the most hidden tip of the podcast yet. Go to Trader Joe's for good $2 wine.
I don't know if this will sell it. Yeah. But this is also 10 years ago.
Yeah, fair enough. And speaking about different hosts using PriceLabs, are there particular types of hosts in different locations or in different segments of the market that would most benefit from using PriceLabs?
Yeah. Locations we cater worldwide, unless you have like this one-off very unique property, right? Which is less about competing with the market, but it's just like purely experiences. So what I mean by that is, for example, I know there's like a customer that we have, or at least prospect that we had, who had this one island home, like where on that island it was just his home, off the coast of western coast of Canada, actually, right? And it's just this one home on the island. There's nothing else nearby it. It's an experience that you like. He has a boat that takes you from wherever to that island, right? We can't comp that. We can't do supply and demand on that. That's like just very unique an experience, right? Now, if there were 100 other islands nearby, or even 30 islands nearby providing similar experience, then we could comp it and we could do, hey, yes, like I can price this, right? But if it's like very unique, then we can't price it, right? Number two that I would say is we also get some hosts who are, like I said, right, on either ends of the spectrum, which is like, hey, I want to price low and just like get all of my bookings in, right? I don't care about revenue. Then you're paying to PriceLabs for no value at that point. Like PriceLabs is not delivering value. Or the second kind of hosts that we get who are like, I only want to price high, and at no point do I want to drop my prices, no matter what's happening with supply and demand. Even then, then you're not. Like you have to be flexible with just understanding that there is a market clearance that happens at certain price points, and so at some points we'd increase prices, but also we'd also drop prices if we need to get a booking in.
That makes sense, because if those different types of hosts aren't really getting the main benefit, which is really what you guys are doing, are playing around with occupancy, so how many rooms someone gets booked per month, and then pricing, so then you can maximize your revenue per month, right? So if someone doesn't care about like, or is really stuck on the pricing or is really stuck on the occupancy, then PriceLabs can't play around with those to make sure that a host
Exactly. If you're too stuck with your controls, then PriceLabs is like a little bit of a difficult thing. Having said that, like if you're a more advanced user where you truly understand, in which case you can just say, hey, I'm going to take control over. PriceLabs does provide me all of these controls to get to my achieved outcome. You could do that, right? But like if you're a host with 1, 2 property, 3 property, and if you're putting in too much controls, then you're not getting value out of PriceLabs, and probably should not be paying for PriceLabs at that point.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then in very simple terms, maybe what is dynamic pricing and what do people get wrong about dynamic pricing?
Yeah. So I'll start with what do people get wrong about dynamic pricing, and that will answer the what is dynamic pricing, right? What do people get wrong about dynamic pricing is oftentimes a lot of people assume dynamic pricing is about increasing your rates, right? That is not what dynamic pricing is about, right? So that's the number one thing that people get wrong. It's about increasing your rates, right? Or following your competition, right? That is not what dynamic pricing is about, right? Dynamic pricing is about fundamentally looking at supply and demand for any given day and saying, how much supply do I have? How much demand do I have for that day? Expected demand do I have for that day? And then where should I be pricing, right? So that may mean for maybe a Taylor Swift concert, I may be able to extract more value out on that day by increasing my prices, right? But that may also mean, hey, if there is a slow day, right, I may reduce my prices. I should reduce my prices because if I keep my prices high, I will not be one of the properties that gets booked, right? So people expect dynamic pricing means increasing prices, right? But unfortunately, it is not just increasing prices or decreasing prices based on supply and demand curve, right? So that's number one thing that I would say. The second thing that I would say is people also expect, because you're using dynamic pricing, I should be able to make more money than I had made last year without dynamic pricing, right? But again, going back to supply and demand, right? Say in 2021 or 2022, not 21, 22 was a peak travel year, right? Even 21 was a peak travel year, right? And in those peak travel years, like there was a lot of revenge travel happening because of COVID, etc., right? And people were able to extract a lot of money in terms of bookings, right? Because also there was a lot of money, especially in US market, right?
Yeah.
People were able to charge quite a bit, right? But now, if you look at compared to 2022 earnings, sometimes you may not make as much money, right? Because there's not as much demand in the market. So it's not just comparing your year on year. What you want to compare is how are you doing relative to market? Are you doing better than the market, right? So you're trying to beat the market. You're trying to beat 50% of the market rather than saying, how am I doing relative to 2022? Now, having said that, some people can, with right strategies, with right steps, they can even do better than 2022. But their market has to have that that ability to be able to do better than 2022, right? If your market does not have that ability, then you won't be able to.
That makes a lot of sense. And does PriceLabs show you how you're doing compared to your market?
Yeah, you see how you're doing compared to market, particularly in terms of occupancies, right? And in terms of RevPAR, it's a industry metric, revenue per available room or revenue per available night, and how are you doing relative to that, right? Are you being able to get extract more than the market, right, or not? So PriceLabs shows you those metrics. Yeah.
Right on. And then we talked a little bit about beginner hosts. What about someone that's more advanced, have been around for a few years, doing pricing, or maybe even using PriceLabs? What are some things or features that they might not know about that you would recommend them checking out?
Oh man, if you are using PriceLabs for a while, there are so many features that we keep introducing every month, right? So you're hopefully the one thing that you should check out, if nothing else, in PriceLabs is listen to our product updates, which go out every month. And you can also check it up on YouTube because we upload it every month, right? But there we talk about what's new, what's changed, how can you leverage PriceLabs, right? And it's like a half an hour investment every month, right? But it's worth it if you're using PriceLabs, right? So that you know how to think about changing your portfolios, right? Or changing your processes about PriceLabs. Right? So that's what I would say. If you like one thing that as an experienced PriceLabs user, what you should invest on, spend time on our trainings.
Makes sense. Are there any specific updates that get you really excited?
So we have something fantastic coming out in another 30 days, I think. But I'm going to be mum about it. I'm not going to talk about what it is. Right?
Exclusive release on the IGMS podcast.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about it, but I think it's going to be quite a bit of a game changer
Nice.
in terms of how. Yeah, I'm just going to say not how. I'm not going to express what the how is, but it's going to be a game changer in various aspects, right? Having said that, other than that, there are what we are really working on that I'm excited about recently, especially for hosts, is we're working on a new training platform for hosts, right? Just last week, we did this masterclass, 5-day masterclass. We had like 1,600 hosts join and let's go through that masterclass, right? And now using that content plus additional content to build a better training platform so that new users, experienced users, segmented various ways, so that you can go in, you can find your content, listen to it, and be better prepared to use PriceLabs. So that's the other thing that I'm very excited about that we're working on.
I'd love to hear that. That's fantastic. And that makes a lot of sense, especially as you're adding more features and so on. It's just like, oh, you have all these things, and you're like, what do I do? Which ones do I use? And we did the webinar the last week, and it was a really great showcase of all these things, and it just showed how much power PriceLabs has, and it's not a surprise that you're spending more time and investment in training and educating people.
Yeah.
And then along with that, what are some of the biggest trends you see that are affecting hosts in 2024, or specifically hosts using PriceLabs?
The host using PriceLabs, I think it's applicable to anyone, right? But one thing, and I think Airbnb confirmed this in their recent press release, right, or their earnings release, is we're generally seeing a shortening of booking windows around, right? And so a booking window, just so if the listeners are not familiar, is the date when you get a booking and when the stay date is, right? And every market has its own booking window, different booking windows. Like, I mean, your ski markets may have very short booking windows, especially if they're drive to ski markets, right? Because I need to see if there's snow, and if there is, if the weather forecast is it's going to snow, then I'm going to book something, right? But like a beach destination may have, like, I don't know, 6 months of booking window, right? But generally in the market, we're seeing a contraction in booking windows, right? Because actually, I don't know because, but we're seeing contraction of booking windows. The other thing that we're seeing is market as an average in multiple markets is not doing as well as the prior years, right? So, but I mean market as an average, right? That does not mean as an individual host you can't do better than the market, right? And better than your last year. But overall, as a market, there's a little bit of compression that's happening, right? And then particularly US as a market, I think there's just a little bit of slowdown that's expected in terms of consumer spending. So we are expecting a little bit of slowdown in bookings that come through in those markets, right? But still in a wait and watch pattern on that. So those three things that I would say: booking window compression that we're seeing in markets, right? Number two, market as a whole is not doing better than prior years, right? Now, as an individual host, you may have better control. Like you may put in strategies that might get you to do better than prior year, right? But that's the second thing that we're seeing. And number three, consumer spending. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. There is a little bit of slowdown expectation. And so if that results in reduction in consumer spending, then you'd see a reduction in bookings that come through.
That makes a lot of sense. And so in terms of booking windows, you're seeing people kind of wait more last minute to book, different stays.
To book stays, yeah. And so that's also where realizing, so something like PriceLabs, we show users how booked the market is today, how booked do we expect it to get to, right? People sometimes use their prior examples of saying, hey, last year I was already booked 90 days before, right? But if this year people are booking last minute, you may not be. And so you don't have to feel nervous. You have to take this year's reality into account rather than relying on just last year's data.
And do you recommend hosts adjust their pricing strategy because of this new trend of like shorter booking windows?
So PriceLabs automatically picks it up if you're using PriceLabs, right?
Okay.
And we may not discount your prices as early. Yeah, but if you're a manual host, or if you're also taking a little bit of control of PriceLabs and saying I want to control XYZ, right?
Yeah.
In which case I would recommend taking this into account that you may not want to kick in your last minute discounts too soon, right? Because the demand just hasn't come in yet.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Great. And then I guess you touched on a little bit about what you see in the short-term rental market as a whole, I guess right now in the trending. Is there anything, I guess, like visions you have for like the future of the short-term rental market, where it's going maybe in the next 5 years or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, so I think that trust in short-term rentals in various markets, in developed markets, has been established, and in developing markets, it's getting established, right? So number one, as across the world, I expect short-term rental industry to grow because people are getting more and more comfortable. Even if I'm traveling to certain lesser known, like lesser developed countries, I'm still getting more comfortable with Airbnbs and VRBOs and short-term rentals in general. So I'm booking those as well, right? And so again, Airbnb's release had APAC and LATAM as the fastest growing markets for them, right? Because people are getting comfortable with those stays, right? So that's one that I expect, right? Number two, I do expect continued increase in supply and thus some pressure in how much money you can make out of it, right? Because it's been a successful industry, right? And so the second thing on that, users should gear up to provide better service to their hosts, to their guests, right? Like the host should be prepared for, like the expectations from guests would increase because of the increased competition, right? And so whether that's like making sure you don't have double bookings or you have the right information guides and the right hospitality experiences, etc., right? So making sure you're on top notch on that is the second thing that I expect to happen, and users be prepared for it. Number three that I expect is, personally, I think there will be a little bit more of smaller hosts and property managers that would come into the not smaller hosts, but like smaller property managers that would continue to come into the industry. We have like a lot of, like a few very large businesses that are not doing as well, right? Because of whatever reasons, and I think they will get fragmented back, and so you'd see this. I also think Airbnb is starting to work on their co-host marketplace, right? Where you can be a co-host and you can offer your service, etc., right? And so thus you'd see a lot of these micro entrepreneurs getting created, right? Which is generally great for the industry. Lots of competition, lots of great service providers. Then so that's the other thing that I expect. Lots of small property managers coming into the business.
So a shift towards, like, away from the bigger conglomerates and then towards these smaller hosts. Yeah, and I just saw that announcement too.
Yeah, this might be controversial, but like a lot of people are expecting like property management companies to become bigger and bigger. I do think there are some players who are fantastic, who are great at service, who can take on that scale, right? But I think in general there'd be like a lot more of those micro entrepreneurs that would start.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And with increasing, so you talk about increasing supply and competition, and you talked about, you know, how hosts have to just deliver the best service possible. Is there something else hosts can do to get a competitive advantage as like there's increased competition?
I think it's all about, at the end of the day, the one thing that we have to realize is we are in the business of hospitality, which is all about providing experiences. People are paying these big bucks to come in and stay, right? Because they want to experience, they want to live and create memories for lifetime, right? And so providing those hospitality experiences, right, is what would matter, right? And so that like Yeah, I mean, of course, you should be priced right, right? You should have you should be responding to users well and quickly enough, right? You should be having good, clean guidebooks, etc., right? But I think at the end of the day, this is a hospitality industry. This is all about what people experience, right? And if you provide a top-notch experience, you can generate top-notch dollars for it.
That makes a lot of sense. And if you don't know, IGSMS helps with all those aspects, automating messaging, helping organize your cleaning, making sure you don't get double bookings, and makes it all nice and easy.
Yeah, and I think it's important, right? It's important as we continue to grow, right? I mean, no one wants to show up to an Airbnb. There was this the Netflix horror movie, right, or horror or thriller movie, where like this girl shows up to an Airbnb, and there's someone already in that Airbnb. I've not watched the movie. I only know the premise of it, but no one. But I think at the end of the day, it's a thriller movie. But no one wants that, right? Like you're double booked for a day, and then you have to cancel last minute, or you like get to the home and you can't enter it, and then you have to struggle for locks, or your cleaner has not showed up or anything like that, right? Yeah, I mean, it's like just very basic hospitality standards that we should maintain as an industry.
Yeah, going back to fundamentals and just nailing those down.
Yeah.
And I'm curious with this new wave of especially how the economy's going. Have you seen any trends of what's more popular in terms of luxury stays versus maybe less luxurious stays? And what do you see trends there?
Yeah. There is definitely an increase in luxury stays. We're seeing that, right? People, again, like I said, right, seeking experiences, right? And so there's certainly an increase in that. But I would say I don't know enough to give you comparative data on any of it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Airbnb, these sort of like icon stuff, and that looked crazy. All their
the icons ones looked crazy. I don't know how that's doing. We should probably look at it how that's doing. But what I would say though is, and this is not a new trend. I've seen this happen quite a bit, right? But there are a ton of people now getting into truly experiences, right? And making their properties stand out, and that really helps, right? I know, like one of our colleagues took his daughter to an Airbnb where they just stayed at, like it was a staycation, but this Airbnb was like a Taylor Swift designed Airbnb, not Taylor Swift designed, but like Airbnb that has like all kinds of Taylor Swift photos and whatever have you. I don't know what else does it have, but it looks like, and so his daughter loved it, and that's becoming a little bit more prevalent from what I see, right? I know like one of our customers has like a Dolly Parker house in Nashville, I want to say, right, where like everything inside is very Dolly Parker, right? So that's becoming a thing, and it's nice, I think.
Yeah, the Taylor Swift is a genius idea.
Exactly, right?
Girls will be clamoring for that one.
Yeah.
That's great. And I was also curious to ask you this one. So everyone talks about AI. And in a sense, I feel like you guys have been using AI maybe before it became popular. But maybe talk about what role AI plays into dynamic pricing and what you guys offer at PriceLabs.
Yeah. So one, you're right. We've been using AI for a really long time, since 2010, right? What we do is artificial intelligence.
Before it was cool. You guys did AI before it was cool.
So we do AI we've been doing AI for a really long time, right? Artificial intelligence, right? Because what we are trying to do essentially is, in some ways, what a human would do and run the math, etc., right? Our machines are doing that math, right? And whatever the human would learn in terms of, okay, I've learned something about the market, I'm going to now implement a new strategy. That's what our algorithms do, right? They learn that and implement it, right? What the difference in some ways, what's become really popular now is this concept of generative AI, right? Or the chat GPTs, right? And generative AI generally is applied to a broad branch of things, right? So you're looking at global data sets, all kinds of things, and you're coming up with some kind of content against it, right? What PriceLabs is what we'd call as maybe a narrow AI, right? Where we look at a very local data set of what's happening in short-term rentals, so what's happening in hotels, right? What's happening in terms of events, supply and demand, etc., right? And that application is, and we're making that application more precise, right? So the generative AI is looking at broader data sets, being able to generate content out of it, right? We're looking at very narrow data sets to saying, okay, with this data set, how can I generate the right price points, right? So that's one. Number two, we're making some changes in terms of generative AI as well, right? So in some graphs in PriceLabs, you can click a button and it will, instead of having to read a graph, it will give you text paragraph of what's happening in that graph, right? So that if you're not a user who's very familiar with reading graphs, right? Maybe it's not your day-to-day job, right? Then you can just read it as a text and it's more simpler, right? We're also including in some places where instead of a user can input certain things as a text, and then that gets applied rather than you having to find or do certain things, right? So we're experimenting a bunch with generative AI as well, right? But PriceLabs has been using AI and something that we'd call as narrow AI.
That makes a lot of sense. And especially, interpreting different, like all these graphs and things together, for someone new might be a little bit overwhelming. So I could see the place of AI coming in and being like, explaining you a little bit of what's going on when they're seeing all these things.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, like it's human intelligence applied on using artificial intelligence, right? And saying, hey, even as a human, I would have, if I knew how to read this graph, I would read it exactly the same way, and then replicating it into using generative AI technologies into text.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Richie.
Of course.
That's all my main questions today. I wanted to ask if you had anything to share or want the users to know.
No, nothing in particular. I'm just, if you've not, of course, my marketing team will be really sad if I don't make a pitch about this. So if you've not tried PriceLabs, please do try PriceLabs, right? We are a revenue management and dynamic pricing platform. Like if you want to understand how much revenue you can generate in a market, you can use our tool called Revenue Estimator Pro. If you're trying to understand what are the supply and demand dynamics in a market, you can use our market dashboards. And if you already have a property, and if you're trying to see how much revenue you can generate from that property, whether that's by increasing prices or decreasing prices, right, based on what's happening in the market, please do give a dynamic pricing a try. We integrate with IGMS really well. So please do that. That's my spiel for it.
Fantastic. And where can they find PriceLabs?
I think if you're an IGMS user, I think you can find it in the marketplace itself, right? If you're not an IGMS user, in that case, you can just go to search for pricelabs.co or pricelabs.com, and you'd end up on our website.
Perfect.